The old man begins in a fashion befitting its title as an old geezer named Dan Chase uses the bathroom multiple times during the night. And in the morning, Dan converses with his daughter Emily over the phone, telling her that something feels off. The first sign that Dan isn't just a regular quote-unquote old man comes after the call, as he places the phone in the microwave and lets it fry. Dan's doctor's visit doesn't alleviate his concerns, as he spots a sketchy guy sitting in the local bake shop, which causes Dan to craft a DIY alarm system using dog food cans. And I suppose this is as good a time as any to mention his insanely well-educated dogs, whose names are Dave and Carol. Emily knows her father well, which is why she's concerned about her father's anxious state. She doesn't buy Dan's attempts to reassure her, and that night we learn through a dream that Dan's wife Abby passed away due to a cognitive disorder. But Dan's sleep is interrupted when something or someone steps on the can alarm system. As Dan looks around the house to see what's going on, his dogs attack the home invader, who is the guy from the bake shop. Dan questions his identity, but realizing that the guy is a pro and won't answer, Dan puts 2 bullets in him. His cool demeanor throughout this ordeal makes it clear that Dan was a pro as well, and he packs up his bags with money and guns after talking to the cops and acting like just an ordinary old man who acted in self-defense. On the road, he tells Emily that the CIA has found him, but she isn't so sure it was them. Dan tells his daughter that they won't be able to contact each other for a while. He has to be off the radar. We then turn our attention to the assistant director of the FBI responsible for the intelligence division, Harold Harper. He's informed about the Dan Chase situation as he's crying his heart out after spending some time with his grandson Henry, who has recently lost his parents. So Harold's kid died and he was off duty, but a CIA agent by the name of Raymond Waters contacts him, explaining to him that he's been tasked with apprehending Dan. Bob Blasky from the Defense Clandestine Service told Raymond to contact Harold because Harold knows about the CIA operative who went missing in 1987 near Torkham, Afghanistan, revealing that Dan used to be an undercover CIA operative. Even though Harold tries to claim that the missing agent's case was closed, he agrees to help once he learns about the killed operative at Dan's house. In the meantime, Dan plans his next steps at a diner and recalls another diner moment from quite a while ago. He and Abby are talking about what they'll do next and how they're gonna grow old together. They are crafting their new identities, and Abby looks Afghani, so it's possible that Dan went missing from Afghanistan to be with her. So a woman is at the center of this mystery. Back to the present, Dan is stunned when Harold calls him. His phone is supposed to be untraceable, but the home invader from earlier planted a bug on Dan's car, which paired up with the phone that's moving simultaneously with the car. Harold's telling Dan about this to make a point about how spycraft has changed since Dan was a part of the game. Harold is willing to help Dan at this stage in order to keep this story buried. He explains that Faraz Hamzad, based in Kabul, Afghanistan, has convinced the higher-ups in the US government to hand Dan over, so the CIA needs Dan alive, and he'll be flown to Kabul if he is captured. Since the resurfacing of this mysterious story would not be ideal for Harold standing in the FBI, he agrees to help Dan disappear. But if Dan ever shows up again, Harold promises to hunt him down by locating and identifying his daughter. Dan calls Emily afterward, and it sounds like he reluctantly agrees to take Harold's deal, and the fact that the agents following Dan find his tracking device on the ground with no sign of him suggests to Harold that Dan is gone forever. But Harold is mistaken. Dan rams into the 2 agents' car and he unleashes his dogs. The old man executes the first CIA agent, but taking down the second one proves to be much more difficult. In a painstakingly realistic hand-to-hand combat scene, the agent gets the better of Dan and puts him in the back of his car, informing Raymond that the target has been acquired. What he doesn't know is how stubborn of a bastard Dan is. He kicks the agent and causes a crash. The agent regains control after another skirmish, or so he thinks, because Dave and Carol saved the day once again. Dan gets the agent's phone and starts speaking to Raymond, though not for long because he asks for Harold, and Dan promises Harold that he'll tear every agent that comes after his daughter to pieces. We go back to the 80s at the start of episode 2 as young Harold and young Dan meet in Afghanistan. Despite being ordered to stand down and go back home, Dan has stayed in Afghanistan because he believes Hamzat is one of the good guys and that he can be useful against the Soviets, who invaded Afghanistan in 1979. So Dan believes Hamzat has the potential to lead the country when they manage to fend off the Soviets. The agency disagrees with Dan, but he thinks he knows better since he is the one in the field, so he's going against orders by helping Hamzat. As Dan prepares to depart after asking for the guns he requested, Harold asserts that he's gonna have to be the one to take Dan down if it ever comes to that. The fact that Harold likes Dan is why he resents Dan for putting him in this position. After the flashback, we find out that law enforcement is now responsible for the Dan manhunt. Previously, this was a black op. And in the meantime, Dan has made it to his destination in Pennsylvania. He plans to lie low at a guest house for a while, and he was expecting the main house to be uninhabited, so he's surprised to come across Zoe, the ex-wife of the property's owner. Zoe doesn't get along very well with dogs, so she doesn't think this will work out despite Dan's offer of extra money. However, Dan's car breaks down as he prepares to leave, so he knocks on Zoe's door and waits with her until the tow truck arrives. When Dan sees that Zoe is eating microwaved food, he starts cooking for her, and this softens her up. Zoe ends up asking him to cook for her from time to time, as well as pay some rent up front, and in exchange he can stay at the guest house. It's difficult to determine if Dan was being genuinely kind or if he was just acting, which is what makes him such a fascinating character. He obviously has the social know-how of impressing strangers and appearing trustworthy, but he does that so well and he appears so authentic that it's not easy to call him completely fake. In fact, Dan impresses Zoe so much that she asks him out for dinner, and he has to accept to not make her suspicious. On the way back from the date, it gets hairy for a second during a traffic stop, and Dan even imagines killing the cops and Zoe if things were to go sideways. At first we think that's what happened, but luckily that was just him imagining things. It doesn't come to that and they go home to get it on despite Dan's reluctance. Dan knows this will complicate things. He can't stay here because he doesn't want Zoe to get hurt, so he packs up all of his stuff and gets ready to say goodbye to Zoe. When he walks into her house, she is a mess because her son wasn't able to attend an exam due to late payments. Zoe's ex-husband is responsible for that. This is his way of punishing her from time to time. The alimony check apparently bounced, and Dan feels sorry for her, so instead of leaving, he wants to give her the money and he starts cooking again. Elsewhere, Harold pays a visit to Morgan Boat, who appears to be Harold and Dan's mentor. Morgan had warned both men that their recklessness would come back to bite them, and it has. He gives Harold a phone number on a piece of paper, warning him that if he takes it and uses that option, and if the truth about that ever comes out, it will not be ideal for his reputation. We later find out that the number belongs to a hitman, Julian Carson, and Harold knows where Dan is located because of the earlier traffic stop. Harold got a bunch of files when he was with Angela, and instead of sharing this with her, he goes away and calls the hitman to bury this story once and for all. In a conversation with Angela, Raymond theorizes that Dan was the legendary warrior in Hamzat's group who shot a rival warlord from 1,000 yards away. Dan was so legendary that he had his own nickname. And Raymond tells Angela that Harold was also in the area at that time, coordinating with the Mujahideen, so he thinks Harold is definitely connected to Dan and he must know why Dan fell out with Hamzat. Episode 3 features more snippets from Afghanistan, confirming that Dan's wife Abby used to be married to Hamzat. Hamzat trusts her a lot because she's smart and capable. She plays a crucial role in Hamzat's organization, which is why Dan has to prove to her that he can be trusted. As Abby talks about how she was hours away from traveling to the US with her professor parents before the coup in Afghanistan made that impossible, they spot an airdrop carrying M21 sniper rifles, and that's important for Dan standing in that community because he promised that he would deliver these guns. And earlier Abby was questioning how those guns would actually help them, and Dan assured her that he could easily hit a target from 1,000 yards away. Then we go back to the future to watch Harold's hitman call from the other side. The hitman, Julian, seems just like a normal and helpful healthcare worker. He's talking with his grandmother on the phone and then he helps a girl boarding a bus, but he doesn't get on it because that is when Harold calls him. After this phone call, Harold makes Dan spotting at the traffic stop official and a SWAT team is on its way to apprehend him. In the meantime, Dan is attempting to bid farewell to Zoe, but she isn't making it easy for him. She knows there's more to Dan's backstory than he's letting on. That's why she lied to the cops during the traffic stop by telling them that Dan was her husband. She felt the need to protect him, and Dan tells her that her instincts were right. Emily calls her father to ask him if he's on the road now, because it turns out Angela is Dan's daughter, and she tipped him off that the law knows his location. When she learns that Zoe is slowing Dan down, Angela wants to speak with Zoe, and the FBI agent explains how her parents had to live under the radar to evade the CIA. She does this because Zoe hadn't understood the gravity of this situation. Nonetheless, Zoe refuses to go with Dan and tells him to be gone when she comes back. The directing in this particular sequence is exquisite. The camera follows Zoe, but in the background you can spot a stranger following Dan in the house, followed by a cracking sound and the barking sounds of Dave and Carol. So Zoe steps out of her car to investigate and there's a bullet hole in one of her windows. She gets closer to the window and sees that Dan is trying to fend off Julian. Zoe then releases the dogs from the car to save Dan. Dave and Carol attack Julian, and Dan retrieves the hitman's gun and shoots him, and then he has to prevent Zoe from going to the police. He claims that they can't trust anyone. After shooting a drone with a sniper rifle, we learn that Dan has driven to a remote location and there he opens his trunk, which in all likelihood contains Zoe. Julian is able to survive thanks to his Kevlar and he has a getaway driver, so he should be fine. While at the FBI headquarters, Raymond is quite angry to see Dan get away again. He notes how neither Harold nor Angela are surprised by this. Obviously, he doesn't know that Harold sent in the assassin while Angela tipped Dan off. By this point, Harold and Angela figured out that Hamzat must have specifically requested an agent like Raymond be put in charge of this case, because the Afghan warlord wants answers and Raymond, being the disliked nosy agent he is the perfect man for the job. Harold tells Raymond how Dan stole Hamzat's wife, and that's what this is about, and so he wants a meeting with Hamzat. Raymond eventually obliges. He agrees to arrange that meeting, but he promises that he'll go after Angela if he is ever deceived again. That is important because over the course of the show's first 3 episodes, we have learned that Angela and Harold are sort of like father and daughter. Harold has always looked out for Angela and she has been very loyal to him in their professional life, while also being good friends on a personal level. The events of this episode puts Angela in a tough spot as she has to protect her real dad Dan by betraying her more present father figure Harold. While that is technically a tough choice, I'm not sure Angela really struggled to make that decision as she appears firm in her support of Dan, but it is an interesting dynamic nonetheless. We delve deeper into Dan's past in episode 4, and this time he takes revenge on a high-ranking Soviet officer whose savage soldiers wreaked havoc in the region while Abby was present. She barely escaped, so Hamzat has to show that they can't come after his wife, though he can't afford to launch a full-on attack on the Russians, which is where Dan comes into play. Alongside Hamzat's sister, Dan sneaks into the Soviet base and kidnaps the high-ranking Soviet officer after stealthily killing some guards. The Russian officer is brought back to Hamzat, and a voiceover by Abby reveals that this was what put Hamzat on a path to become monstrous, and that monstrosity eventually forced her and Dan to run away. Back to the present, Zoe climbs out of her car's trunk as Dan apologizes to her for having to do this, claiming that his only goal was to protect her. He tells her to call her son and explain to him that she is being held against her will. This way they can't come after her for being an accessory once this is all over. Zoe's son doesn't pick up and they get back on the road, and it's telling that Zoe gives Dan the silent treatment as she lets her disdain known without uttering a single word. While Dan heads west to arrange a meeting with someone that may hate Hamzat as much as he does, Angela and Harold prepare to meet with Hamzat's lawyer and fixer, Nina Kruger. Once Dan reaches his destination, he tells Zoe that they will use aliases. They'll be Henry and Marcia Dixon. And Dan plans to meet with someone named Zachary to arrange the aforementioned meeting. We then check in on Julian and his fellow hitman. They aren't at all happy about the situation they were put in by Morgan. He either willingly sent the assassins into an effed up situation, or he had no idea. Either scenario spells trouble to them. Later on, Julian calls Harold to conclude their arrangement, telling the FBI man that Dan was tipped off before he arrived, so there must be a mole in the FBI. Harold can't bring himself to acknowledge the validity of Julian's assertion, but it's clear he knows Julian is right, and he does something about it in his meeting with Kruger. Firstly, Kruger talks about a memo they prepared, blaming Harold for Dan getting away. This would almost certainly end Harold's career in government and his legacy would be tainted, so Harold tries to convince her that he can get the answers Hamzat seeks, because he was in this mess from the beginning. In order to prove his knowledge, Harold mentions Abby's real name, Balur Dotfar, but as he does this, he's looking at Angela to see how she reacts. It's brilliant, he's killing two birds with one stone. He is convincing Kruger that he can get Hamzat the answers he seeks, while also confirming his suspicion that Angela might be the mole, that she might be Dan and Abby's daughter. Kruger contacts Hamzat and provides Harold with two options. He either gets on a private flight without asking any questions, or he stays behind and the memo gets leaked. Harold feels as though he's got no real choice, so he agrees to board the plane. Angela, in the meantime, realizes that the walls are closing in on her. She calls Dan to tell him she's getting on the plane with Harold, because Harold is already suspicious and not getting on the plane would prove his suspicions correct. Dan pleads with his daughter to leave her life as Angela behind, but she's not willing to give up the life she's built. We also learn that Angela's proximity to Harold isn't an accident. It was planned, and this has been Angela's goal from the beginning, to keep an eye on Harold to protect her family. At this moment in time, she's realizing how complicated undercover work can be, because the line between her two identities, Angela and Emily, almost doesn't exist anymore. She can't really tell which parts of her are really hers and which parts are fake. Shortly afterward, Harold and Angela board the plane. Dan, in the meantime, has been trying to convince Zachary from Corsair Finance to make an investment. This is how he plans to get the attention of the man who hates Hamzat as much as he does. Dan was one of the earlier investors in this equity firm, and he's got millions tied to it, but Zachary isn't too enthusiastic about making a hasty move like this. Dan's day gets worse when he comes back home to learn that Zoe has written a letter to the Corsair Finance's board using her alias, telling them that they are getting a divorce. This divorce process would make Dan's current play impossible, as the board wouldn't want to do business with him until the process was complete. Zoe wants half of Dan's assets to keep playing along as his wife, or she gets a lot of money now and stays put until the danger subsides. Dan loses it because Zoe is threatening to put Dan and Angela at risk, and as we've established already, he really doesn't like it when his daughter is in danger. At the start of episode 5, Hamzat is trying to get the captive Russian officer to speak, but he's having no luck. Abby secretly asks Dan not to help Hamzat because she has apparently been feeding information to the Russians to nullify Hamzat's opponents in the area, and Dan thinks they can share this with Hamzat. He thinks Hamzat would understand. But that's not the only secret Abby has kept from her husband. She knows of a lithium and uranium reserve that would guarantee Hamzat's rise to power once the Russians are gone. However, she's afraid that revealing this information to Hamzat would put him in charge too quickly, and attaining power in such a manner would make him king, not president. Dan wants to believe that Hamzat's good-natured character would keep him in check, but Abby doesn't think it would. Disagreements are the theme of this episode, with Zoe and Dan facing off in the present, as well as Angela and Harold doing the same. So let's continue by discussing the FBI agents. On Hamzat's plane, Harold rips off the band-aid and calls Angela by her real name, Emily, and she knows there's no point pretending anymore and tells him how Dan called in some favors to put her in this position. Angela tries to convince Harold that her loyalty to him for the last 10 years has been genuine, but Harold is understandably dismissive. He asks her to choose between Angela and Emily, but she doesn't think that's fair or possible. She views both Dan and Harold as her father, and she can't choose between them or between Angela and Emily. After Harold reminds Angela that she's a criminal, she tells him he is no different because she knows he sent the hitman to Zoe's house. So exposing one another isn't really a feasible option here. The plane lands in the capital of Tunisia in North Africa, and Harold explains that this was Dan and Abby's last stop before they made it to the US. Harold and Angela are taken to an archive room without any instructions, but Harold figures out that Hamzat wants him to find the needle in the haystack to know that Harold is the real deal. Harold finds Abby and Dan's flight information with ease because he was the one who arranged this exfiltration. He then calls Kruger with this info, but for whatever reason, she is not satisfied. Kruger says they'll release the memo proving Harold's guilt before the end of day. Angela thinks they can spin this story once Hamzat is dead, so they should go after Hamzat and tell the world that Harold was targeted by a bad actor from his past for unveiling the truth. Harold fought to clear his name, and he did. That's the story they'll tell, and for that plan to work, they would need to find Dan and help him get to Hamzat. Talking of Dan, let's check in on him. He clears things up with Zoe, making sure that she understands his indifference toward money. For him, money is just a tool to protect his family, and he needs it right now because Angela is in danger. However, he can still afford to share half of it with Zoe, and she can F off basically, but she also wants to know what's actually going on here, and Dan agrees to tell her everything if she comes with him to Morocco. Dan has to drop Dave and Carol off at a pet hotel in quite an emotional scene, because this feels like a permanent goodbye, and the contract solidifies that point, as it shows that Zoe is supposed to pick them up. It's once again clear that Dan doesn't care about himself, he just wants to protect his daughter, so he's willing to go the whole way to kill Hamzat. Zoe prevents Dan from scaring Zachary, and instead she goes in as his wife and convinces Zachary to approve the investment that's going to get Dan the meeting he wants. Afterwards, we see the couple get on a flight to Morocco for that meeting. Elsewhere, Morgan returns in this episode, telling Raymond to prepare for a special operation. Julian walks into the restaurant toward the end of this phone call, and Morgan comes clean to the hitman. He reveals that Dan asked him to put Angela in Harold's office. That's why the hit went wrong. Angela leaked that the police were on their way, and Morgan apologizes to Julian for this. Morgan also says he shouldn't have loved his two sons as much as he did, referring to Harold and Dan, and he asks Julian to take care of both of them. They're not Morgan's biological sons, but he does love them as if they were, at least up to a point. The penultimate episode of Season 1 reveals that Dan released the Russian officer back in Afghanistan on behalf of Abby, and even though Hamzat is aware of his wife's disappearance from the bed that night, he doesn't believe she would free the Russian. He knows his wife has some secrets, but a betrayal of this magnitude is unthinkable. Back to the present, Dan gives Zoe a crash course on spycraft as they make their way to their meeting with Pavlovich, the man who can get to Hamzat. Dan explains how he always has to look for angles, how he can gain the trust of other people, and how he can use their trust against them, which in turn means he's never really able to trust anybody himself, because he has to expect the other side to do the same. Using a bank account as a backup communication method, Dan learns that Angela is on her way to meet him in Morocco, and he gets on a boat to go to Pavlovich's reception. When Pavlovich takes Dan inside, we learn that he is the Russian officer Dan freed, and Dan is now calling in the favor Pavlovich owes him. Unfortunately for Dan, Hamzat has already reached out to Pavlovich using his lawyer Kruger. Pavlovich wasn't sure he needed to be on Hamzat's good side, but upon learning how Hamzat used his influence to get to Dan, Pavlovich figures he should probably hand Dan over to Hamzat. Dan neutralizes the guard trying to apprehend him, and he shoots another one before pointing the gun at Pavlovich and saying, "That's twice." That line was probably the most badass moment of the season because Dan could have easily taken Pavlovich down, but instead he chose to keep the Russian alive, probably to call in those favors in the future, though I'm not sure how much he can be trusted. In the meantime, Kruger approaches Zoe and offers her a deal. Hamzat doesn't care about Zoe, so she should just give Dan up. That's how Kruger tries to convince Zoe, though before she can do that, all the commotion I previously mentioned kicks off, and Dan quickly reunites with Zoe to leave on a boat. However, they are surrounded by law enforcement as soon as they arrive at their destination, and Harold tells Dan that the old man took Angela, and they'll get her back. So the old man is Morgan. He reached out to Harold to offer him a lifeline to save his reputation, and in exchange he wants Angela to be the fall guy, or the fall woman, and Morgan says Angela can just disappear, she can go her own way and never come back to the US. That's the deal. And apparently Angela learned something was up from Harold's grandson Henry. Henry told Angela that an old guy came to their house last night, and Angela knew it was Morgan from the description. So Harold tells Angela about the deal he was offered, and Angela urges him to take it, because the well-being of Harold's family is on the line and Angela cares about them. As Harold leaves Angela and approaches the Moroccan intelligence officer that'll accompany him, he spots Raymond outside and grows suspicious. So he runs back to check in on Angela, who is now gone. In fact, Harold saw Julian too, but he didn't know what Julian looked like, so he couldn't recognize Julian. This was apparently the operation Morgan was putting together. He never planned to let Angela get away, so he sent Raymond, Julian, and the other hitman after her. The Season 1 finale reveals why Abby had to flee Afghanistan. Hamzat has grown frustrated with his wife's secrets, and he isn't satisfied when she says she's been feeding information to the Russians to weaken their opponents in the area, because Hamzat has already suspected that to be the case. No, Hamzat knows there's something else she's not telling him, something bigger, and upon learning what it is, he urges her to tell him the location of the resources. She explains why she can't do that, how that much sudden power would corrupt him, but he makes it clear that she doesn't get to make that call. Hamzat gives Abby until the morning to make a decision, so she either talks or else. He doesn't spell out what'll happen to her, but he doesn't need to. That's why Dan contacts Harold and asks for an exfiltration, and Harold loses it because he's been helping Dan support Hamzat without the agency's approval, and now Dan has to abandon and betray Hamzat. To prevent any complications in the future, Harold wants Dan to kill Hamzat. We have to go forward in time to understand why Dan didn't kill the Afghan warlord. Morgan arranges a deal that would free Angela if Dan gets on a flight and surrenders to Hamzat. Julian, Mike, and Raymond are holding Angela, and Mike is getting the feeling that they are being surrounded and that Morgan isn't telling them the whole story. Dan takes the deal in a heartbeat, and he's on his way to the airport with Harold and Moroccan intelligence officers, but we find out that Mike's suspicions were correct. Raymond calls Harold, and Harold changes course to protect Angela. Dan has to neutralize the Moroccans because their orders are to get Dan to the airport, but they are too late to rescue Angela. By this point, Julian had neutralized the entire team surrounding them, but one of Hamzat's operatives was posing as a civilian, and she killed Mike and Raymond to retrieve Angela. But why? Well, as it turns out, Angela is not Dan's daughter. Her real father is Hamzat, and Abby took Angela with on her way to the US. And Dan didn't want to kill Hamzat in front of Angela, which is why Hamzat is still alive. That is Dan's official explanation, but in my opinion, he could have killed Hamzat after Angela left the room. No, I think Dan couldn't bring himself to do it. What he was doing was bad enough already, and I think he still loved Hamzat enough not to kill him. So all this time, Angela thought she had to choose between Harold and Dan, between being Emily or Angela, but both of those identities were crafted for her. In reality, she is Hamzat's daughter. The season ends with Angela arriving in Afghanistan to meet Hamzat, while Dan and Harold, now on the run together, get to an airport. The Old Man is my favorite new show of 2022. It's not without its flaws, but the way it toys around with themes of identity and parenthood in an espionage setting, as well as its masterful cast, made the show a thrilling ride. From the very first episode of the show, it was clear that this was gonna be expertly directed. The camera angles and the way they let every single scene breathe, their refusal to rush things, the way in which different characters interacted with each other, and the utilization of the flashback scenes were all great. In terms of the plot, what I liked the most about Season 1 was Hamzat. He seemed like the classic mysterious antagonist pulling the strings from behind the curtain because he didn't appear in the present until the finale. But when you think about it, it's really hard to paint him as the villain or the bad guy. I think that the real piece of shit here was Abby, and even Dan was questioning whether or not he was used by her because of what Pavlovich said to him. Pavlovich revealed that he was recruited by Abby, not the other way around, and she did this years before she actually got married to Hamzat. So did she also recruit Dan? Was she playing him? I think at least partially that she was. And you could argue that Hamzat is a monster for threatening to hurt Abby, his wife. But what do you call going behind your community's leader's back to manipulate him? That's treason. It's a dangerous game with clear consequences. Abby knew what she was doing. She knew what the rules were. And I think it's likely she married Hamzat with only one goal in mind, to rule her country from behind the curtain. Can we be sure that Hamzat would have gone rogue if Abby shared everything else she knew with him? Or would he continue to be the virtuous leader Dan perceived him as? And aren't you basically turning him into a monster by kidnapping his daughter? What do you think he's gonna do once he learns that a CIA operative ran away with his wife and his daughter? So maybe sharing the truth about the uranium would have had bad consequences, maybe, but the alternative, running away with Dan and Angela, betraying Hamzat in such a manner, guarantees Hamzat's rage. Those are the uncomfortable and tough questions we are left with at the end of the season, and I am of the opinion that Abby is the villain in this story, and I'm disappointed that Dan, an otherwise brilliant spy, let his feelings get the better of him. As for this season's flaws, I wasn't satisfied with the lack of any real plot resolution. The ending was a twist, it was a reveal, not a resolution. If they didn't have to worry about the budget or other restrictions, I would have made this season 8 episodes long or maybe 10 episodes long, and this reveal would be the major turning point, as I don't think it really works as a season finale for me. I also think that the last 4 episodes dragged on for too long. They could have easily been condensed to 3 episodes and then this finale would be the 6th episode, and they could have used another 2 to 4 episodes to give us an actual plot resolution. I did praise the directing a little bit, but the actors being directed were the real stars here. Jeff Bridges and John Lithgow were obviously incredible, but their younger selves were so much like them, not just physically but also in terms of their mannerisms, that I was in awe. Those actors made the flashbacks so enjoyable for me, because I felt like I was watching the actual young versions of Harold and Dan. Amy Brenneman's performance as Zoe deserves praise as well, but she got a little too much screen time for my liking. Alia Shawkat displayed Angela's conflict incredibly well, and the actor playing Julian was decent too. I liked how cool-headed he was, so I'm glad Julian is still alive. It is time to reveal my rating now. You can see my scale on the left-hand side. I will give The Old Man Season 1 an 8 out of 10. When I first started watching the show, so after episode 3, it was almost a 10 out of 10, a 9 for sure. But the aforementioned lack of a real plot resolution and the drawn-out nature of the second half of the season means that Season 1 gets an 8, which still means that I like the show a lot. Well, what did you think about The Old Man? What is your rating out of 10? Leave your comments down below, like this video if you've enjoyed this breakdown, and subscribe for more movie reviews and TV show breakdowns. That is it for now, take care and see you in the next video.